Council did not bring together the FBI and CIA and other agencies with responsibility to protect the nation, and apparently did not even ask follow-up questions later about the warning. The bipartisan 9/11 Commission summarized in its unanimous report what happened, and I quote, "We have found no indication of any further discussion before September 11th between the President and his advisors about the possibility of a threat of Al-Qaeda attack in the United States," end quote. The commissioners went on to report that in spite of all the warnings to different parts of the administration, the nation's, again I quote, "domestic agencies never mobilized in response to the threat. They did not have direction and did not have a plan to institute. The borders were not hardened. Transportation systems were not fortified. Electronic surveillance was not targeted against a domestic threat. State and local law authorities were not marshaled to augment the FBI's efforts. The public was not warned," end quote. After the attack of 9/11, we know from the Commission's report that within hours, Secretary Rumsfeld was busy attempting to find a way to link Saddam Hussein with 9/11. We know the sworn testimony of the President's White House head of counterterrorism, Richard Clarke, that on the day after the attack, September 12th, and I quote from Clarke's account, "The President dragged me into a room with a couple of other people, shut the door, and said, 'I want you to find whether Iraq did this.' I said, 'Mr. President, there's no connection.' He came back at me and said, 'Iraq, Saddam, find out if there's a connection.' We got together all the FBI experts, all the CIA experts. They all cleared the report, and we sent it up to the President, and it got bounced by the National Security Advisor or deputy. It got bounced and was sent back saying, 'Wrong answer, do it again.' And I don't think I'm continuing the quote from Richard Clarke, I don't think the President, sees memos that he wouldn't like the answer," end quote. This was the day after the attack, and the President did not ask about Osama bin Laden. He did not ask Mr. Clarke, in any case, about Al-Qaeda. He did not ask about Saudi Arabia or any other country other than Iraq. When Clarke responded to that first question by saying that Iraq was not responsible for the attack and that Al-Qaeda was, the President persisted in focusing on Iraq. And again asked Clarke to spend his time on this day after the worst attack in the history of the United States on our soil, to spend his time as the man in charge of counterterrorism in the White House, to spend his time trying to find a linkage between the attack and someone who had absolutely nothing to do with it. Again, this is not hindsight. This is the way the President was thinking at the time he was planning America's response to the attack. This was not an unfortunate misreading of the available evidence causing a mistaken linkage between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. No, this was something else. A willful choice to make a specific linkage, whether evidence existed to support it or not. Think about that. Think about that. Because whoever is elected on November 2nd will face other questions. And will face other challenges. And will have to make other difficult judgments about how to protect this nation. Earlier this month, we had an independent report of what information was presented on the impression of a linkage. Secretary Rumsfeld, who saw all of the intelligence available to President Bush that might bear on the alleged connection between al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, finally admitted under tough, repeated questioning from reporters, and I quote, "To my knowledge, I have not seen any strong, hard evidence that links the two," end quote. This is not negligence. When the administration is told specifically and repeatedly that there is no linkage, and simultaneously makes bold assertions in a confident manner to the American people that leave the impression with 70% of the country that Saddam Hussein was primarily responsible for the attack, this is deception. This is deception. It is clear that President Bush has absolute faith in a rigid right-wing ideology and does not feel the same desire that many of us would in gathering facts relevant to the question at hand. He ignores the warning of his experts. He forbids any dissent, never tests his assumptions against the best available evidence. In fact, he is arrogantly out of touch with reality. He refuses to ever admit mistakes, which means that so long as he is our president, we are doomed to repeat his mistakes. It is beyond incompetence. It is recklessness that risks the safety and security of the American people. We were told also that our allies would join in a massive coalition so that we would not bear the burden alone, and is known by one and all now. We are, in fact, bearing that burden, more than 90% of those who are not Iraqis. And as I mentioned, the second and third largest contingents in the non-American group have announced just this week that they will begin withdrawing soon after the U.S. election. We were told by the president that war was his last choice. But it is now clear from the newly available evidence that it was always his first preference. His former Secretary of the Treasury, Paul O'Neill, confirmed that Iraq was topic A at the very first meeting of the Bush National Security Council just 10 days after the inauguration. And I quote, "It was about finding a way to do it." That was the tone of the president, saying, "Go find me a way to do this." His encounter was similar to Richard Clark's. We, the American people, were told that the president would give the international system every opportunity to function. But we now know that he allowed that system to operate only briefly as a sop to his Secretary of State and for cosmetic reasons. Bush promised that if he took us to war, it would be on the basis of the most carefully worked out plans. Instead, we now know, in sharp contrast to what he told us at the time, that he went to war virtually without thought and certainly without preparation for the aftermath. An aftermath that tragically has now claimed more than 1,000 American lives and many multiples of that among the Iraqis. He now claims he went to war for humanitarian reasons, but the record shows he used that argument only after his first public rationale